Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today is part 2 of my 2022 post-season power rankings. If you did not see part 1, I went over teams 20 through 11. You can find that linked in the description as well as in the cards. And at the end of this video, you'll be able to see that if you did not check it out. And at the end of the video, we will take a look at the full power rankings of all 20 teams, so you can just stick for that if you want to see that. But if you want to hear my entire reasoning for why I have all the teams where I have them, check out part 1 from last week. But that is all you need to know going into this, other than, of course, this is my own rankings, so if you disagree, let me know in the comments down below, but be civil about it. I love to have discussions about it, so let me know in the comments down below. But without further ado, let's jump in and go over 10 through 1. At number 10, I have the Atlanta Reign, one of the weaker performances in the playoffs. I do give them a little bit of leeway because they did lose to the same team twice. They lost to the Florida Mayhem 3-0 and then 3-1. So to me, it's the type of thing where how good or bad they really are is somewhat difficult to tell because we don't have the full subjective look at it. And so it is a little bit tougher because they did lose to the same team twice. So we know they're worse than Florida. Do we know how much worse they are than a lot of the other teams that made the playoffs? Unfortunately, we really don't. But down the stretch in the season, they did not really keep the same momentum we saw from them in the first half, where they got third in the kickoff clash and third in the midseason madness. Really dominant performances against the APAC region in that midseason madness. They didn't really have anything similar to that in the second half of the season. They missed out on the summer showdown. They looked somewhat questionable during the Countdown Cup. So all in all, decent season from the Reign, but as the season progressed, they really just did not hit the same strides they hit early, and their playoff performance was one that left a lot to be desired, especially when you consider the fact that this team was a grand finalist a year ago. They made it all the way to the grand finals. This year, they were not really able to match that, and so I have them here at number 10. At number 9, just ahead of the Atlanta Reign, I have the Florida Mayhem. They went 2-0 against the Reign in the playoffs, so obviously they have to go ahead of them. They were a team that at the beginning of the season I genuinely thought was pretty middling and not that entertaining and really not that great of a team to watch, but they really shored up a lot of their stuff late in the season, looked a lot better. Very solid performance in this Summer Showdown and very solid performance in the playoffs, getting those 2 wins against the Reign, but losing to the Seoul Dynasty and the Hangzhou Spark. So not an incredible performance out of them, all things considered, but overall a somewhat respectable showing that had them able to beat the Atlanta Reign twice. Much like how I can't really say a lot about the Atlanta Reign because we only saw them lose their 2 games against the same team, the Mayhem are a harder one to place as well because we only saw them win against the Reign and lose against other teams. So clearly they were better than the Reign. How much better were they than the rest of the teams around them? That's much harder to tell, and that is a big part of why I have them down as low on this list as I do. They had a good run. They looked very, very solid in the playoffs, but it's tough to put this team any higher when you consider just the fact that they didn't look great against the APAC teams that they played. The one win against the Reign in the first round, and then winning in the lower bracket. And as much as I think that Hydron looked very, very good for this team throughout the season, I thought that they were kind of a somewhat inconsistent, somewhat hard-to-watch team at times in terms of the way that they play around their coordination. It was not always the cleanest and the best. So I thought they had a very good season based on what the preseason expectations for this team were. But to me, the 9 spot is where they finish in the rankings. At number 8, I have the Shanghai Dragons, 2021 champions. They were not able to hit the same highs this season. They did look good in the Summer Showdown, but outside of that tournament, they were relatively weak in this 2022 season. So I think they're a team that just really couldn't keep up with a lot of the way the rosters around them were changing. Meta changes, I think not being able to play Fate and Void together also had a big impact on the way this roster was able to play. So I think this is a team that did not thrive as much in the move to 5v5 as some of your other great rosters in the league. But they still had a very, very good season. Losses in the playoffs, unfortunately, to the Hangzhou Spark and the San Francisco Shocks. They did go 0-2 in the playoffs, so not a great showing out of them. But overall, I think they were a very good team this year. I rate what they did this season higher than what I do the Mayhem and the Reign. So at the end of the season, I think you have to give the Shanghai Dragons just ever so slightly the nod above the Mayhem and the Reign. A good season from them with a lot of expectations. Incredible performance out of Lip, especially in that series against San Francisco. Even though they lost, it was one of his best performances of the year. Absolutely dog style of play out of him. Love to see that from him. And so after what was a very, very, very good season from him, the team was not able to get much further. But overall, I think a very solid team. One of the teams that I think when you look back on the season, it wasn't what you wanted to happen, but you can at least look back and say, hey, we had a championship or a tournament win. We made it to the playoffs. We did pretty well. All things considered, I'm pretty happy with how this season went. Dragons here in the 8 spot. Here's where my list starts to take a bit of a turn for the controversial. In the 7 spot, I have the London Spitfire. Their playoff run was impressive with a win over the Fusion and a win over the LA Gladiators. But it was after that Gladiators game that the Spitfire, to me, really kind of came back down to earth with losses to the Houston Outlaws and the Hangzhou Spark. Both of those series relatively one-sided. And so while I don't have them above the Gladiators roster that they did defeat, ultimately the reasons for that comes down to the fact that I think that they played the Gladiators at the perfect time for the Spitfire. Gladiators had struggled to adapt to the new meta, and so at that point in time, the Spitfire were able to kind of catch the Gladiators off guard, really able to take advantage of those weaknesses that the Gladiators had presented, and able to get that win. I think most of the time when they would play, I would favor the Gladiators in that series. Gladiators did not have a great playoff run, so I think it's probably about a 60-40 in the Gladiators' favor there. I don't think the meta was great for what they wanted to play. To me, the Spitfire really kind of fell flat after that Gladiators win. Not a close series with Houston, not really a close series with Hangzhou. They did not give me a ton of faith. The Fusion series was good for them. That is a thing of note. So it's tough for me. This is where you get that really tough spot in the lineup. But I think that just based on the fact that the Spitfire struggled more so in the Countdown Cup than the Gladiators did, both playoff runs were relatively close. Spitfire were slightly better than the Gladiators. So Spitfire had a good run. Obviously, Coach of the Year Christopher, very, very good season. But to me, I just feel that this is really where I would favor them in terms of overall matchups. I wouldn't favor them above any teams ahead of them the majority of the time, but I think that they would be very, very close with most of the teams above them on this list, and that's why I have them here at 7. At number 6, I have the Hangzhou Spark. Obviously, this is a ranking that is very heavily weighted based on their playoff performance, but I don't think you can really judge this team as a weak team or anything like that when you look at their playoff performance. This is a team that has struggled, I think, to find their footing a lot this season. They really did not have a great second half of the year. They were the, I believe, second worst team in terms of record in the second half of the year with only 2 wins. But they had a dominant play-in win over the Chengdu Hunters and a very good playoff run, beating the likes of Shanghai, Florida, London, and somewhat competitive games against Dallas and San Francisco. The 2 teams ended up making it to the grand final. So this Spark roster, obviously very, very, very heavily successful off of the back of Shy and Gushui in this playoffs. They found a meta that worked for them. But we'd seen sparks of this, pun not intended, Spark roster earlier in the season as well. It was just in the second half of the season, they started to do things weirdly. Obviously, they did not really adjust to the Jotes meta. They made some changes by bringing in a couple of new players with Neko and Teru. This roster didn't really seem like it fit, but this play-in or playoff patch really was good for this team. We really saw what this team can be, and I think that's really the thing that I'm weighting this ranking heavy for. Could they be high on this list? Absolutely. If you want to judge me based on how well they did and some of the other parts in the second half of the season. But to me, the playoffs is the most important part. How do you perform when your back's against the wall, you're up against the best teams in the world? And the Spark, more often than not in this playoffs, came in swinging, came up big. And so to me, they are the 6th seed or 6th team on this list. At 5, I have the LA Gladiators. Maybe a bit of a high spot on this list for them. But to me, I really do rate very heavily what they did in both the Countdown Cup, and I think their playoff run was a bit of a skewed one based on the results that we look at when we look at them, right? Their loss to London was bad. The Gladiators did not look good in that game, and the Spitfire looked much better than they did. Gladiators did not look comfortable in the meta. They looked like they were struggling to figure it out. But their game against the Fusion, very, very good showing from the Gladiators. Their game against the Shock had moments where it looked pretty good, but I think the loss to the Shock was not a surprise when you consider just how good the Shock looked. To me, the Fuel and the Shock are in a tier of their own when you consider just how well they looked. Spoiler alert. In the playoffs. The Gladiators, to me, weren't favored in that game. The Shock were the better team in every way, shape, and form. They just looked more comfortable in the meta, so I do give the Gladiators a bit of a break for them having to play the Shock and struggling against the Shock. However, this was not a good playoff for them. They did not look good. They struggled a bit in terms of adjusting to the meta. They were playing Tracer and most teams were playing Reaper. They were switching Happy and Kevster between the main kind of Sojourn role and the Reaper role. I didn't like those decisions. I didn't like what they did, but I still think overall they were a very solid team. I think you cannot say that they were not a top 5 team in the Overwatch League this season. Even when you look at the way the postseason went, they did not have a great run. I understand that. I totally agree their run was not good. They finished, 7-8 spot. But ultimately, I think you have to look at the Gladiators' run and say that they lost the games you kind of would have expected them to lose when they played the Shock. And to me, just ever so slightly edging out the likes of the Hangzhou Spark. And I think if they were to play the Spitfire, like I said before, 60% of the time, I think the Gladiators were going to win. Spitfire just were the better team in the day. Right now, though, I still think the Gladiators were the more impressive team as a whole. And so I'm going to give them the 5 spot. Just barely, however. At number 4, I have the Seoul Dynasty. I was very high on this Dynasty roster and this Gladiators roster going into this playoffs. Neither of them really lived up to the hype and expectations. Dynasty, I thought, were very, very good in a number of areas, but I thought in the playoffs they did not excel much in the support line, which was a surprise because Vindime was incredible all year. He didn't look very good. Iris is on Kiriko didn't look great either. I didn't like them putting in Prophet on Kiriko after their loss to the Fuel. I thought Smurf looked good. I thought Prophet looked pretty good. I don't think that we saw the best performances out of Fitz in this playoff. So to me, this is a team that looked very, very good when they could kind of play what they wanted to. I mean, they dominated the Florida Mayhem. That game was not close in the slightest, but they went up against some very good competition in the Fuel and the Shock, and they were just unable to really match that and play to that level. And I just think that they looked uncomfortable, which is kind of surprising when you consider how many stars are on this roster, but I just didn't love what they did. I didn't love a lot of what they actually had to show in the playoffs outside of that Mayhem match. They 3-0'd the Mayhem and then lost 6 straight maps after that, so hard for me to say that the Dynasty had a very good run, so I unfortunately cannot put them any higher than here at number 4. Number 3, I have the Houston Outlaws. Very good playoff run from them, getting 3rd in the playoffs. Just because they got 3rd doesn't necessarily mean I think that they deserve the 3 spot. Obviously, that isn't really how I view this. But I do think the Outlaws had a very good look in the second half of the season. They were very good in the Countdown Cup. They looked really good in the playoffs. They got a win in against the Shock in the playoffs as well, which I rate very, very well. I thought that was a very good showing from the Outlaws. I thought Merritt looked great. I thought Pelican looked great. This team has a very strong central core. The only thing I think that they really had holding them back was, as much as I think Dante had a very good season on the tank role, I don't think Dante had what it took to be a championship caliber tank. Very, very, very good, but I think that was the shortcoming. It was hard for them to out-duel Fearless and out-duel Mikey, but as a whole, very happy with the Houston Outlaws performance in the 2022 season. I thought their playoff run was incredible. It showed you just how talented this Outlaws roster really is. But at the end, they definitely fizzled out and were unable to get over the hurdle that was the Fuel and the Shock, despite their earlier win to the Shock. So I think that they deserve this 3 spot because they did look very good as the season progressed. As the playoffs went on, they had a very, very, very good run and a pretty dominant run at that. Their win against the London Spitfire, huge win, pretty dominant victory there. Dominant victory over the Toronto Defiant. Dominant victory. I believe it was, well, I guess it wasn't a dominant win against the Shock the first night I played, but overall, very good run from them. I think they deserve the number 3 slot. They looked very, very good, very, very comfortable. They looked like they knew what the meta was. They looked very adaptable, and so to me, no-brainer, Outlaws at 3. Next up, we have the obvious number 2 selection, the San Francisco Shock. Number 2 overall seed going into the playoffs. Number 2 team after the playoffs. Obviously, a lot of that off the back of the MVP, Rookie of the Year, and Roll Star Proper. Incredible year from Proper. He had an incredible playoff run as well. Very, very close to winning the grand finals as a 7-mapper. Obviously, very, very, very good game. But they did not go the distance. I think they had some limitations in terms of some of the playmaking ability at the tank role and at the support role. Though I think that those two were very, very serviceable and strong for what they were. For their shortcomings, I think they made up for it, 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100. There was just a couple times here and there they just couldn't really get over some of those hurdles. If you look at just how well Fearless played in that playoff, kind of shutting down Proper, the Shock were able to really kind of rally around what they had and what they were able to do, which was kind of a surprise when you consider some of the facts that there are some instances where I thought the Shock wouldn't really be that good, and to me they had a lot of moments where I kind of figured that they're not going to be a championship caliber team, but they proved me wrong time and time again. They made some incredible midseason additions, bringing in Mikey and Striker, making a roster that I thought overall very, very solid. Their playoff run was unbelievable, beating Shanghai, the Gladiators, the Dynasty, the Spark, the Outlaws. They had a major, massive run. Incredible from them. There is no denying that they were one of the best teams in the league. Second place finish in the grand finals just solidifies them, in my eyes, as the number 2 team. Finally, the no-brainer number 1 is the Dallas Fuel. They are your 2022 Overwatch League champions. Great performance out of them in the playoffs. Fearless looked great. Edison looked great. Sparkle looked great. Fielder, Chio, all of them had very, very good performances throughout the playoffs. They were one of the most elite teams throughout the season. They were your number 1 overall seed going in. They walked away as the number 1 overall team when all was said and done. Really impressed by what they did this year. Obviously, I had doubts about them at times, but they really managed to kind of work with what they had. Edison stepped up big time in the Sojourn role, which ended up being one of the biggest, most important roles in the entire season. And so to me, there's no denying, based on the entire season, and especially based on that dominant playoff run, though obviously very close grand finals, that this Fuel roster finished the season on top of the world and at the top of my power rankings. So there you are. That is my list. That is my power rankings. Definitely some picks that I think could be a little controversial. They always are, which is something that happens when you have stuff like this. But I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments down below, your thoughts on my rankings, if you agree, if you disagree, how you would rank the teams. I'll just throw up the full power ranking. You can see it, all 20 teams, 1 to 20. You can see where my tier breaks are as well. You can kind of see how I figure these teams are in terms of overall record. Really, really close there in the middle, but to me, like, the top is pretty obvious and the bottom is pretty obvious. Other than that, you can put them anywhere, and I think there's not really much that I would say to disagree with you, unless you maybe put Atlanta over Florida. That'd be weird, but don't do that. But that's it for me for this one. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed, want more videos like this in the future and want to support the channel, consider liking and subscribing, as your support does mean a bunch. But that's all for me for today. Thank you once again. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.